Last week, we heard from ITV's Director of Strategy, Policy and Regulation, Magnus Brook, as part of the evidence that we were taking into the draft media bill. But of course, at that stage, we didn't feel it was appropriate to discuss this issue because it was really important we had the opportunity to scrutinise that bill in full. But we did feel it was appropriate to have a separate session to talk about the working culture at ITV, and I'm grateful to you all for offering us this opportunity to come in separately. So today we're joined by Dame Carolyn McCall, ITV's Chief Executive, alongside Kevin Ligo, Managing Director for Media and Entertainment, and Kyla Mullins, General Counsel and Company Secretary at ITV. You're all very welcome. Before we start with our questions, I thought it might be helpful for me to set out our approach today. Firstly, you'll all, I'm sure, appreciate that since we announced that we were going to do this session, both I and I'm sure members across this committee have been inundated with stories from people about their treatment when working in the media and their concerns. And we clearly don't have the manpower or the resources to investigate every single one of these individual cases, but I just want to put on record how grateful we are to everybody who's been in touch, and to reassure them that the questions that we asked today will have been informed by quite a lot of what they told us. Secondly, while it's inevitable that many of our questions today will link to Phillip Schofield and directly to the case that he's been involved in, we do fully intend to try and respect the privacy of the other individual involved. I know that ITV have been referring to him as person X within your correspondence. The point of today's session is not a witch hunt against Phillip Schofield. It is to investigate the wider issues that are raised by this case. And finally, shortly after we invited Dame Carolyn to appear before us, ITV announced an inquiry into the Schofield case. We've received the terms of reference for that on Monday, and we've published them on our committee's website yesterday. We don't expect that this inquiry will be a barrier to ITV answering any questions today, because we are seeking information that should already be available to the panel. Okay, before we start the questions, I'm going to ask any members if they have any interest to declare. I should start in that my father was a presenter of ITV for very many years.
I'm a former ITV employee.
Yeah, I'm a former ITV employee.
I've accepted hospitality from ITV in the past.
I've been to ITV events over the years, and I'm a former news anchor for ITV.
I've accepted hospitality over the years from ITV as well.
And if we're doing that, I have as well.
Yeah, I went to dinner. We all have.
I don't know how far we're going back, but I'm not sure if I have or not. I'll declare it.
Here today, so we're just going to move on. Thank you very much. Dame Carolyn, since the story emerged about the relationship between Mr. Schofield and the junior employee on his programme, there has been a very common theme in response to from figures in the entertainment world, including some current and some former presenters on ITV. So, for example, Piers Morgan said, and I quote, "Everybody at ITV knew what was happening." James Haskell said, "I knew about this, everyone knew." Kevin Maguire said, "We had all heard the rumours." Can I just ask you, from your vantage point as the chief executive at ITV, do you class yourself in the category of the vast majority of people who seem to know what was going on, or are you telling us that everyone else knew what was going on, but somehow you and perhaps Holly Willoughby were the only ones who did not know?
Yes, Chair, if you don't mind, I'd just like to say thank you very much for inviting me in here and my colleagues. We've taken these issues extremely seriously, as I hope you know. We're particularly glad that we're talking about duty of care in some detail. We look forward to that, and our culture. In every company I've ever worked for, and this is my track record, I've put people at the centre. I've always treated people well. I've always wanted people to come into a place where they feel comfortable, where they can speak up, where they can speak out, where they can be themselves, and where they're happy to come to work. One of the reasons we asked the KC to come in and look at this, the whole thing, is because we will always want to learn, to listen, to act. So whatever emerges from the KC inquiry, we will learn from it, because there will be lessons. No organisation can do anything perfectly, and we certainly are not saying we have. I think the KC coming in kind of demonstrates our commitment to improving and involving everything we do at all times. A good example of that is actually duty of care, where since 2018, since I joined actually, and we've reviewed it, we've strengthened it significantly, and we will talk about that in some detail today. Another reason goes to your point about who knew what. Another reason for welcoming this is that there are huge numbers of opinions, there's speculation, there's rumours, there's misinformation out there, and we look forward to making clear the facts that we know. So thank you again. I'm just going to go straight to your question about the common theme. The people that have said they knew would only have heard rumours about it. If any one of the individuals you have named or referenced had come to us and said there is evidence that there is a relationship between Phillip Schofield and person X, we would have, with evidence, we would have been able to launch a formal investigation, because the imbalance of power, the imbalance of dynamics in that relationship makes it deeply inappropriate. And we have policies that say that very clearly. And so one of the things you, I hope, will see as we go through this is that we worked very, very hard for many, many months, in fact, until recently, to ask people, not just Phillip Schofield and Person X, but people in production, if they knew something was going on. And it was repeatedly denied by both individuals, but also no one in the team ever said there was anything that they could say. In fact, most of them said, we don't know what's going on.
When did you personally first become aware of these rumours?
I really became aware of those rumours when Phillip came out in February 2020. That is the first time things got really febrile. Social media was awash with, some extremely nasty comments about Phillip, as you'd expect, but also just a whole swathe of things about him as a person and his there was a lot of speculation and rumour out there. So in February 2020 is when Kevin and I spoke about it, and we actually started looking at it in December 2019, but it ramped up considerably. The kind of noise out there ramped up in 2020.
What you're basically saying is, like the vast majority of people within ITV, you were aware of the rumours about this relationship, but following investigation that you were carried out and the denials that you received from all parties, you were satisfied that the rumours were entirely false. Is that correct?
What I'm saying is that I don't know if it's the vast majority of ITV. You've named three people, I think, high-profile individuals who say they knew. If they knew, why didn't they say something to Kevin? Kevin has conversations with all of those people as talent all the time. So, number one, I don't know if it's the vast majority of ITV people. I don't accept that. It certainly doesn't feel like that to me, right? The second thing is, in February 2020, it was hard to miss the amount of coverage about Phillip when he came out. And therefore, I obviously knew in social media in particular that there was a huge amount of comment about him being gay, how long had he been gay, how long has he lived a lie, there were all sorts of aspersions that crossed over to his brother. There was a lot of very, very horrible stuff out there, and I think we said we need to just establish whether this is rumour and speculation and malicious, or whether there is something we need to worry about here. And
you were given reassurances by both parties that there was nothing to be concerned about?
If it's all right with you, Chair, I'd like Kyla. Now, Kyla is not just company secretary, she also is director. She runs compliance and also whistleblowing in ITV. She's responsible for those policies. I'd like us to just go through the sequence so you can see what we did to try and establish whether anything was going on. Kyla.
Certainly. So we first really became aware that of speculation and social media speculation, which was triggered by a newspaper article on the 6th of December 2019. And in that article, there was a reference. It was an article with many allegations and a lot of commentary about This Morning and about the relationship between Phil and Holly, and other presenters on that. But also, there was a reference to a Philip's PA and personal runner moving to a different programme despite a previous close friendship with him. Those were the words. And there was a huge amount of media speculation. Our head of daytime and our head of production on that day spoke to Person X because he was being inundated by press, by journalists contacting him, was aware of social media, and they asked the question at that stage, is there any truth in this? Is there anything that we need to know about a relationship with Phillip Schofield? And the answer was a categorical no. He was traumatised by the intrusion in his personal life, and our focus at that point then moved swiftly to duty of care for him and trying to make sure that we could support him in whatever ways were appropriate to handle the social media intrusion on his life. Conversations with him continued in January. Again, the focus on duty of care, but also asking the question each time. So we had HR involvement by this stage. The head of production, who has continued having dialogue with Person X over the last 3 years at intervals. Person X and our head of HR for daytime spoke to him on many occasions, focusing on his welfare, but also using the opportunity to ask the questions. I think he was asked the question 12 times, and we have logs of the conversations that were had with him. At each stage, he categorically denied it. When Philip came out on the 7th of February, I believe it was, in 2020, again, a spike in social media commentary. And again, there were meetings with Person X and questions with him. In parallel at that stage, serious conversations with Phillip Schofield and his agent, very direct conversations with his agent, and that was Kevin who can talk to those, also our head of daytime and our editor in daytime. So at each stage we had various levels of management asking questions of both individuals, also of Philip's agent. And in addition, as Carolyn has mentioned, there were various conversations with people on the production floor. Our head of production asked people working on both This Morning and Loose Woman, who might have been closer to Person X, to try and establish were there any facts, were they aware of any truth in this matter, and the answer at each stage was no. So we conducted all of those conversations at that time. No one came forward with any evidence. Straightforward, categorical denials each time it was asked, and conversations continued also in May this year, right up to the day when Philip finally admitted that he'd been lying to us, and at each stage, denials. So Kevin, I don't know if you want to touch
Yes,
on
I when did I first know? I think when Philip decided he wanted to come out, the agents and Philip's contacted the head of daytime and the producer of the programme, and he said, I've been thinking about this for a long time, I want to come out on air, and so that was discussed. And then I think when they'd had that discussion, I was called about it saying, there's going to be a big thing tomorrow, what do you think? And I said, well, if that's what he wants to do, okay. Philip presents the programme Monday to Thursdays. He doesn't do it Friday. So this was on the Thursday, and he came out the next day when he didn't have to then sort of present the entire programme. So he just did it on a show that he wasn't presenting that day. So I went down the next morning to the studio to see Philip, to see how he was and everything. And there were various people around, and we discussed, was he sure? He was really agitated and nervous. And I remember saying to him, look, you don't have to do this now if you don't want to. You don't have to do it on TV if you don't want to. He said, no, this is absolutely the way I want to do it. I've been thinking about this. This isn't a sudden decision. I've been talking about this with my family. It's just the moment now I want to do it. So I said, okay. Then there was a moment when we were alone, and I said, look, Philip, don't worry about ITV supporting you through this. It's fine by us if you want to do this. What, though, is there anything that you want to tell me now? Is there anything we should know that has prompted this, or that you want to share with us now? Because it's fine, but we just don't want suddenly tomorrow or the next day to hear something we didn't know about and be blindsided by it. And he absolutely, categorically said, no, there's nothing. This is just a private matter, and I want to get it out there because I've been thinking about it for so long. So that was it, really.
From what you're saying, I mean, it sounds to me like you regard the efforts that you went to chase this up as being adequate. And I mean, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Do you think that they were adequate? Do you think that they were competent?
What we think about this is that, just remember, there's another very important bit of the timeline, which is on March 2018, all ITV employees were sent home because lockdown started. And so this was very close onto March 2020. Did I say 2018? March 2020. So it's just quite important that, because then this all stopped, because no one was at work, and actually Person X was put on furlough for 9 months. So it's just an important thing. And over that time, our head of production had duty of care conversations with him, but nothing else. So it's just important in terms of the process we went through that it stopped in March for reasons of lockdown. What we would say is that we had done, we feel, from a process perspective, but also from a human perspective, we asked multiple times of both individuals, both formally and informally. And so we felt that was proportionate to what we had, because we had no evidence. No one brought us anything tangible, either on the production floor or from the outside. There was only hearsay and rumour and speculation. The other thing we would say is that we were very, very concerned about the state of mind of both Philip and Person X. So Philip was not in a good state, as Kevin will tell you, when he came out. Very anxious, very worried, very nervous, very worried about the social media backlash, all of those things. And Person X could not really grasp the media intrusion that was so prevalent in his life now. And so we had to balance how we asked questions, and we did ask them formally. There were meetings, HR was present, so we did a balance of informal kind of, is there anything we need to know? How can we help you? To Person X, how can we help you? What more do we need to know? You can do this confidentially, you can do this anonymously, you can talk to a counsellor, just because we wanted to make it easier for him, because you're not used to being in the press as often or in social media when you're in that position. So we were, very mindful of our kind of duty of care obligations, but just as a human being, not making what was a very difficult situation for Person X and actually also Philip worse.
It sounds to me as if you're saying that the investigation was thorough and the decisions that you made were well-founded.
Chair, can I please just say it was not an investigation? I wouldn't qualify this as an investigation. I think this was a review. It was an ongoing review that every time there were periods of intense speculation, we went in and asked more questions, but it was an ongoing review.
Would the assertion then leading from that be that if you could go back in time and do it all again, you'd do it exactly the same way and you would probably have reached the same conclusion?
I think that if we had our time again, let's see, I'm not hiding behind the KC, but let's see what the KC says, because that's one of the things we want to learn, which is there anything that we could have done or spotted? At the moment, we can't see what that is, because we did interview both individuals, as I've said, but also other people. We have a very, very clear and loud speaking up policy. We really do. I mean, the vast majority of people, when they reply to surveys that we do on this, say that they feel confident that we will act if they speak up. That comes from a tangible, quantitative survey. So we have done, and we can talk about our speak up policy later, our whistleblowing policy. So anybody at any time could have confidentially gone to our helpline, Safe Call. It's completely anonymous. It's run by an external company. They could have at any time said something about this. We had none of that. So therefore, we feel, in the circumstances and with what we had, that we had no legal reasons to go any further with an investigation. If we'd had any evidence, we would have done a formal investigation. We had no evidence. There was absolutely, it's not in our interest in any way not to investigate something that we know has evidence to support it. You know, put it another way, had we gone into, with no legal reason, into a formal investigation, we would have caused a huge amount of damage, I think. The mental health issues around, you know, the strain, instead of mental health issues, let me just say the psychological strain on person X, etc., would have been quite intense. And so we didn't have any legal grounds to do that.
As far as you're concerned, there's no circumstances under which you could possibly have inadvertently or purposefully turned a blind eye to some serious shortcomings at This Morning because it was an incredibly commercially successful programme.
It's nothing to do with it being commercially successful. It really, really isn't. I mean, all our shows are actually commercially successful. You could say that about every single one of our shows. There's not a show in ITV, because we're a commercial PSB, that is unsuccessful. So you say that about it is nothing to do with commercial success. It is entirely to do with how we were trying to look after people, but we were also trying to ask, and we did ask, questions repeatedly, continuously, and were repeatedly told there was nothing happening. And I also said that as we see it today, our understanding and our information so far is that we could not have done this differently. But if the KC does say and recommend that in future we should do any aspects differently, we will listen, we will learn, and we will act. But today, and there were nobody would be turning a blind eye to something. It's not a blind eye. I mean, nobody here or on the management board would ever turn a blind eye to something as serious as this.
The only thing I would say in response to that is surely you're aware that the same imbalance of power that enabled Mr. Schofield to enter into this, what he called inappropriate relationship, would also be in play if he was seeking to keep that relationship secret. So you need to ensure that you've got in place the systems and processes that are somehow able to find a way around that.
So let us tell you what our systems and processes are to ensure that that doesn't happen, and perhaps you could talk about our speaking up and safeguarding policies.
We'll come to that later on. Actually, we've got a few other questions we want to get to first, but thank you, Clive.
Yeah, just very briefly, I listened to those answers. We as a committee are very concerned about the welfare of the individuals that are involved here, in particular Phillip Schofield, but most of all, person X. So could you tell us what support you're giving to them at this moment in time and whether that will continue into the future?
Yes, we've remained in touch with Phillip, as you'd expect, and he is receiving counselling. We're just saying that Phillip is just receiving counselling, and which ITV are funding, and that he asked for that, and we're very happy to do that. With person X, there's a whole series of duty of care all the way through. I mean, even though he left the company in 2021, we have constantly given him aspects of duty of care as recently as last week. So do you want to outline some of that duty of care?
Certainly. So as I said earlier, the director or the head of production who was involved in having the initial conversations with him has been continuing those conversations with him throughout, is in contact with him not on a daily basis at the moment but on a regular basis at the moment. We have offered him an ongoing package of support, including counselling. We have given some support when there was media intrusion, physical media intrusion at his parents' home and also in his workplace. We offered support around that, and we've been offering support and trying to help him manage takedowns and social media. So there is a package of support, and that is ongoing. We're in discussion with him last time a couple of days ago.
And we've seen reported, as you've written to us, saying that he doesn't want to speak, he doesn't want any publicity around this, and he wants it really to die and go away, which I fully understand. But if he wanted to speak out, you're not aware of any impediment to prevent him from doing so?
There's no impediment. There are no NDAs, gagging orders. There is nothing in place from our perspective that would stop him speaking out. When he left ITV, he entered into a standard settlement agreement. There is a clear carve-out in that which makes it very clear that for whistleblowing speaking up, there is nothing that would prevent him from doing so.
Thank you.
Do you share concerns that Phillip Schofield's being hounded like Caroline Flack?
I can't. I don't want to make those comparisons. Although I would say I think he has been hounded, and I think he said himself that he has nothing really. If it wasn't for his daughters, he wouldn't be alive. He said that publicly.
And are you personally, individually concerned for his welfare?
I'm very concerned. Yes. Look, I spoke to him the day before, just because I knew that him standing down from this morning was a pretty major thing in his life. I actually phoned him and just said, look, I know this is very difficult, and Kevin has offered you further work, so please don't feel awful about it. There is more, and he was really grateful that I'd called him. He said, look, this means so much to me. I didn't know he was going to say on Friday that he had lied to us and that he had hidden this for so long. But no, we have been concerned about Philip, and we've been extremely concerned about Person X because the level of intrusion in his life is unbelievably awful.
Have you individually spoken to either of them since that?
I've never spoken to Person X. It wouldn't be something that I would do. But I have spoken to Philip, as I've just said.
Have you spoken to Philip since he admitted that he lied about this relationship?
He just sent me a text saying how deeply, deeply sorry he is for lying to ITV and to his family, and for how much has been caused by it.
I did speak to him. Rather like Caroline, I spoke to him when he wanted to step down from this morning. I think it was the daily, effort of doing a show for 2 hours live every day was the thing that made him think, there's too much noise and I don't want to do it anymore. I'm so sorry. Is that all right? And we said, well, if you want to step down, you can step down. And we did talk about, because there was another show coming up a couple of weeks later, the Soap Awards, that he was booked to present. And I said, are you still okay to do the Soap Awards? Do you want to do that? He said, yes, absolutely. Dancing on Ice is the only other show he does for us, which is in January, once a week show. And he asked about that, and we said, well, don't worry about that now. That's so far away, we can deal with that later, but don't worry. And I think on the record I said he would be continuing to work with us. And then, I can't remember if I actually asked him at that conversation, but there isn't anything, is there, Philip? And he said, but he would have said, no, there wasn't. I mean, it was just 3 or 4 days before he said, actually, sorry, I've been lying all the time. He looked me in the eye and promised me that there was absolutely no truth whatsoever in the rumours of this relationship. And because it was corroborated, I suppose, by Person X, and there had been, through the whole of this, have been no complaints as such from certainly anybody in ITV about it. Obviously, there were rumours and things. I believed him, and I believed his agents and everyone. And then 2 days later, everybody comes out and says, no, it's a lie.
It is important to talk about how many times you spoke to the agent, or that the head of daytime spoke to the agent. So a lot of conversations were had with Philip's agent about this whole issue.
Yeah, many more than with Philip himself. So you can be a lot more direct, obviously, with the agent. And the agent, because the agency handles quite a lot of clients on ITV, we talked to them a lot, and they were consistently adamant that these rumours and more kind of, what should we do to make them go away? Can we take legal action? What can we do? And discussions like that, but absolute categorical denial. Of course, it's not true. No, no, Philip's definitely not. No. and so we didn't pursue that with them. and then later, of course, they said he had been lying to them for 20 years, whatever it was.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. And Dame Carolyn, do you ever find yourself asking yourself the existential question, why am I here?
I'm not as deeply philosophical as that, Mr. Brennan.
Because
I'm not sure where that question is going. So all I would say is that I am here because I believe in public service broadcasting and I believe in ITV, and I think what we do is an incredible public service, but it's also entertaining, and we do massive amount of news. We do regional news better than anybody else. And we're very proud of what we do, and that's why I'm here. I mean,
and you left off that list, and the glory of our parliamentary democracy as well, you believe in as well.
And we support, through our news in particular, our democracy.
Because I can't remember, in the 22 years that I've been a Member of Parliament, ignoring more phone calls and messages from journalists on any subject than this. Why do you think that is?
I think that we produce a huge range of programmes. We have a huge amount of talent. I think the BBC get the same as we do. So whenever anything is going on at the BBC, it tends to dominate the news agenda. I think whenever anything is happening at ITV, I mean, we're on the news pages for many reasons other than this, i.e. for our entertainment shows. I mean, we will do a big entertainment show like I'm a Celebrity. We'll be on front pages every day of the papers. So I think that is, Ms. Brennan, though, I think that is because the BBC and ITV are part of British culture, society, and on
life. That point, what I was going to say is that this is all very interesting. The whole thing is fascinating, and it's of interest to the public. But I'm struggling, or am I wrong in struggling, to try and identify how this is all in the public interest that we need to know all of this? And there are serious issues, obviously, underlying all this. So I don't want to trivialise it, but why is all of this in the public interest, do you think?
As a PS, I feel that I'm here. I mean, if I was, if we weren't a PSB, I don't think I'd be sitting in front of you. I think if I was, I'm not sure I would be. I don't know. I mean, you can answer that. But I think as a PSB, you will want to hear what we've done and how we've done it. Yes, and I understand that. And as I said, I welcomed that because I wanted very much to put some facts clearly down. And I also wanted you to understand how seriously we take things, but also how much we care about the people that work at ITV. This is a vibrant, creative, proud organisation, and what has been said, from the outside often, or from people who are no longer at ITV, people feel very deeply about that at ITV. No one feels at ITV. The vast majority of people at ITV feel that they are, they're looked after. That we have many different ways that they can tell us their feedback and their input. It doesn't always have to be a complaint. It can just be about, I'm not getting flexibility at work and I need some help. It could be a whole range of different things. But we do listen, and we have so many different ways of listening. So I can't really answer why you've got me here. I can say why I am here.
And I accept that's not your role, because we invited you after all. But what were the policies and procedures in place at ITV for incidents of this type at the time of the initial investigations into these rumours surrounding Phillip?
That's where I was getting to. So thank you. Kyla, would you just go through our, what we do?
So our policies and procedures, although obviously they're updated regularly, whether it's to take account of new regulation, Ofcom guidance, but also best practice. So clearly our policies and practices as they stand today will be slightly different to those that were in place in 2019.
So how have they changed?
But not a lot. For example, there was a new Ofcom code on protecting participants in shows, which came out post-2019. So we will have incorporated that into our policies and practices. It's that type of thing. I mean, fundamentally, the policies that we had in place in 2019, and it would be helpful for me to give you the shape of those and those that are important here, are very, very similar to what we have in place now. So we have had at ITV a code of conduct Our code of conduct, code of ethics and conduct, is the policy that underpins everything. Lots of policies flow from that. It's a policy that is incorporated into the contracts of everyone who works for or with ITV, employees, freelancers and others. And it sets out very clearly what our expectations are of conduct at ITV, both the conduct that we expect and the conduct that we do not tolerate. It is a very accessible policy document. It has a message from the CEO at the front, which explains why it's so important, and why it's so important also to speak up if you see that there's anything going on.
That all sounds great, and we can take a look at that, I'm sure. But what I'm interested in is that you said there have been some minor changes. Are any of the changes that have happened as a result of this matter?
No.
So if I could just sorry,
Go
Karen,
ahead.
if I'm just so no changes as a result of this matter, and the important points in some of the important points in our code of conduct, as well as absolutely setting out very, very clearly what our speaking up policy is, which I'd like to come on to, is that we do not accept any bullying or harassment, and there is zero tolerance for abuse of position. So anything and that was in place in 2016, 2019, 2021, 2023.
Okay.
And there is a workplace relationship form that you now have to fill in. That started at the start of 2022. It's not a new policy in response to this at all. It was something that we updated, because we update our policies every year, as Kyla said, that we updated that, and we actually said that everybody who works at ITV has to fill in a form where they have to disclose workplace relationships, whether they are romantic or family relationships.
I see.
And we've had that in place since then.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
What do you say in response to the allegation that there was a toxic culture at this morning?
What I would say is that it's not something. Look, we take that seriously. You know, as you've heard me talk about culture, it's incredibly important to me personally, and so it deeply disappoints me, right? But we do not recognise that in this morning, and I think the reason for that is that, you know, we have tangible evidence to tell you where the vast majority of people at daytime, at this morning, are extremely engaged and very motivated. It's not to say that we don't take complaints about it seriously. We've had 2 complaints in 5 years about that issue, right? 2 complaints, both of them taken very seriously. One of them investigated internally, one of them publicly disclosed, so I can name the person, I think. But Ranj Singh complained. I actually asked for an external investigation. That happened and was not able to be upheld. So I do want to give you, if you don't mind, I do want to give you some facts. The participation in our engagement survey, which is done by an external company called Culture Amp, would say nearly 80% of people in ITV participated in that survey. That's high, right? A lot of companies have 60% participation. So that means people want to participate. It tells us how people are actually experiencing working at ITV, and it's totally confidential. They can say whatever they want. They will never be traced or tracked, so you can't do it. So it's done externally completely. In daytime specifically, 89% of people say they are proud to work at ITV. 86% would recommend ITV daytime as a place to work, as a great place to work. 80% of people at daytime are happy with how their manager motivates them. And 75% of them say that colleagues from all backgrounds have equal opportunities to succeed at ITV. So I'm giving you those tangible kind of points. Now, everything was not glowing in an engagement survey, but these are strong scores about how people feel about working there on daytime. So I actually brought the figures in for daytime rather than for the whole of ITV, although of course you can see, if you would like to, the ITV-wide stats, which are very similar to the daytime stats, although the daytime statistics are actually higher than ITV overall. So I think when you use those words about our culture, you know, we don't recognise that culture. Doesn't mean we don't take those allegations seriously. It doesn't mean we don't take complaints seriously. We do. Just to build on what Kyla said, if you don't mind, in terms of policies, because it's all very well having policies, but if people don't read the policy, or they find, that they just ignore them, or they say, oh, that's just, corporate gobbledygook, there are so many other ways that people can make themselves heard. We have an ambassador network at ITV, which is 80 strong. These are people who are elected by people in our offices, of which we have about 24 around the country. They are elected representatives of people. They have regular meetings, not just with members of the management board and listening circles. They actually have a non-exec director who they can go to at any time with any problem or any complaint, and they can do that anonymously with the non-exec director on our PLC board, who is an independent director. We have unbelievably strong networks. We have 5 very strong networks that represent various communities in ITV. There are 3,000 people out of 5,000 belong to those networks in ITV. And there are 4,000 people in the UK that work at ITV, and there are 1,000 freelancers. So 3,000 out of 4,000 people belong to those networks. Those chairs are elected by the people. They are very strong, the chairs, and they are brilliant networks. I personally talk to them. I chair a committee where all of those chairs sit around the table and say the things that they're most worried about, the things that are going really, really well, and we have a discussion, and we do it across all the networks. So those are just examples of how you have a formal complaints procedure, which is all about HR and kind of documenting and having the meetings with HR and your line manager and whatever. But if that is not, if you don't want to do that because you think that's worrying to you, or you're concerned about that, if you don't get on with your line manager, there are multiple other routes, and I've already mentioned Safe Call, which is a number that we promote for whistleblowing widely. I'm afraid it is in the toilets, it is on lifts, it is in car park, it's everywhere. It's on my ITV. I talk about it in my vodcast. I do a vodcast every 2 to 3 weeks for the whole of ITV, and I say, don't forget anything you want to say. Just give us either. I've got an email box called Ask Carolyn. They can just email that box, and they will always get a reply, or they can go to Safe Call. So what I'm trying to describe is it's all very well having policies, but actually policies are sometimes not read by people, so you can do as much as you can on policy, but actually what we really, really foster is a culture where if anyone has a problem, if anyone is concerned about somebody else, they can tell us in multiple ways.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm finding this all very sad, and like Kevin Brennan, I really don't understand why there's such a media frenzy when we have war in Ukraine, starvation in Africa, and Indian rail accidents, etc. Having said that, I do understand the power of personality. But one question, you've very forcefully put your case for the way you manage things formally, how there are ways of people being able to talk to the management of ITV. But we all know, or many of us know, that once you have a long-running program, or a theatrical production, or any program, that they tend to develop their own culture within another culture. You've got ITV, then you've got Celebrity doing this over here, then you've got This Morning doing that over there. And gradually, these cultures can become toxic, can become poisonous, because they are close and febrile by their very nature. Now, there is another aspect to this. When, for instance, and I use the example of the BBC here, when they started dismantling the BBC Club system that they used to have, which was a very useful cross-fertilization tool where people talk to each other on a social level about issues. Once you take that away, and people aren't meeting across the different programs that are being made, have we taken away some form of reference for people to actually air these views totally informally, without going through the management system?
I'll start, and then I'll hand over to Kevin because of productions. But I think we've done the reverse. I think what we did over lockdown, which many people in the world found very, very difficult, but people who were used to coming in every day and being in a buzzy culture and, with lots of teammates, they found it particularly difficult. We actually did a huge number of things virtually when we couldn't do them physically. And we would do social gatherings. So the networks were brilliant. They did a lot of cross collaboration. So if you were in the Embrace network, which is or people of colour, if you were in the Disability network, if you were in the Women's network, the three of them would get together and do a big event. They'd get someone to come in and talk about mental health, or they'd come in and talk about adapting to different kinds of life, and everyone could ask questions. You could ask anonymous questions, you could follow up afterwards. So we did a whole series of things virtually. So there was something in most days through lockdown, believe it or not, so that people could connect. It was very important for us to make sure that people felt connected to ITV through lockdown, and the feedback on that has been very, very positive. I did a vodcast every single week. People could ask me directly questions every single week, all the way through lockdown. Post-lockdown, I think we've actually done even more face-to-face, because we're all now in one building in White City, so the whole of our London offices are now, for the first time I think ever, in one building in White City. And so we do things on a Friday, we do previews, and the networks do quite serious events. So let's talk about bullying. Let's talk about this. What does bullying look like? What does, if you've got a problem, who would you talk to? How would you talk? We've got a balanced network.
But importantly, it's less formal.
There is very informal ways that the networks in particular organise events with our funding and with our support.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, you again.
Yeah, I think with in production, again, being in one building really helps this, but there is a lot of movement actually between people working on one show and then going on and working on another. Because the periods that you might be engaged on making a show are not unlike this morning or something, which is all year round. So some programs just come in for a few weeks to make it and then move on. But the people that come in to make those shows have often worked on other shows. So there's, a lot of people know a lot of people at ITV, and I think there is a culture, certainly that I've seen, of friendship across different departments. The entertainment department is obviously a huge group of people, and they all work together and move across from one show to another. So I think there is a lot of cross-fertilisation about things. They'll be talking socially. We're not, the management is not necessarily present for these conversations, which is a good thing, because I know exactly what you mean about the BBC Club system. So it's more ad hoc and informal, but I think there is a lot of discussion amongst all members of staff with each other about what's going on and how you're finding it over there and all that.
So you felt informed. You felt like you had your finger on the pulse, not only formally but socially as well.
Yeah.
But did it come as a great surprise to you? Because it came as a huge surprise to me, the vituperative outburst that came as a result of these disclosures. For instance, Eamon Holmes said in the tweet that Schofield has finally been caught out, but he's not the only guilty party. 4 high members of IT management knew the sort of man he was and never once took action to prevent him controlling or taking advantage of young people. That's an extraordinary tweet to come out with, and I would imagine extremely damaging. You must have been surprised to receive that.
We didn't receive it. It was on Twitter.
Well, to see it.
Don't look at Twitter.
To see it.
I think it's actually defamatory. Never mind anything else. But of course, we wouldn't say that because it would just inflame the situation. But Kevin, perhaps you know Eamon.
Yeah,
I don't know Eamon.
It's worth an observation here that there's been a very vocal criticism of and the mention of all this toxic culture and everything like this, and it's quite a few people who've got a platform now with a show elsewhere or a newspaper column, whatever it is, or just on Twitter, to have a big go. And it just occurred to me the other day, actually, that a lot of these people, there aren't a lot of them, but the few that there are, they worked as presenters on ITV for a very long time, some of them, it was over 10 years. There was never any complaint from them whilst they were there. If they wanted anything, it was more work, please. We love it here. Can we do more? And then where I have some sympathy for them is when, presenters of programmes often have a slight feeling of divine right to stay there forever. And obviously ITV as a company and producers of programmes maybe have a different agenda and want to change and fresh, want to bring on new people and so forth. And so it's only really, and this is why I do have sympathy for them, when you have to have the difficult conversation of, thank you very much, it's been really good, but actually we'd like you to do less. It's it's not very nice. And I get that, because this is their life, they love it, they've never complained, they thoroughly enjoy it, and their response always is one of disappointment and, oh, can't I stay, can't I do anything? Which is why, honestly, I tend almost never to just cut, but say, look, thank you very much for all the work you've been doing, you're doing a great job, but we want to try other things, but we're not jettisoning you, we'd just like you to do a bit less, or maybe try and find something else for you as well, because they have been, generally speaking, loyal servants to ITV, and so they deserve to be treated properly like that. So, but it's not surprising, is it, that when they go, they're suddenly like, oh, I hate ITV, oh, it's awful. When for a decade or more they were there, reaping the rewards and enjoying the job, and everybody seemed to get on.
So you're saying that this isn't indicative of a pressure cooker building up. This is more to do with resentment.
I don't see that. No.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we keep the answers as pithy as possible? We've got quite a lot to cover today. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Dame Carolyn, and good morning, Dame Carolyn. In your letter to the committee, you talk about no evidence of a relationship beyond hearsay and rumour. Where's that line between actual evidence and hearsay and rumour? What would you have accepted as something more solid?
I think if someone had seen something inappropriate, if someone had heard something that they wanted investigated because they'd actually heard something said by one of those individuals that was inappropriate, that would, anything, I think. Anything that would have been tangible rather than rumour.
So first party sort of witnessing.
Well, I think you don't. The effect of an investigation internally for individuals is extremely serious, obviously, but it's also extremely straining. It's a big strain on the people. Now, that's not a reason not to do it, but I do think legally, employment law would say you have to have evidence. You have to have something tangible that says you are going to do this.
Thank you. You mentioned in your earlier evidence that person X was asked 12 times if he was in a relationship. I started to get echoes of an old war film with a floodlight in my face.
Over a long period of time. This was not in one go.
If someone asked me whether it was over a period of time, or if I were asked the same thing 12 times, I'd start to feel slightly victimised if I obviously didn't want to say anything about that.
Just remember, it depends on the context and the tone of that question. So I think that if that was being, if it was like this, and you were asking for evidence, and it was in a very formal setting, that may well be true, but that wasn't like that. There were a couple of formal meetings which were had with HR. There were multiple kind of informal meetings. And remember also the motive with the question was to help person X, so that if anything was worrying him or troubling him, or if there was anything he wanted to say that was inappropriate, because the rumours were rife about the inappropriateness of this. And therefore, that is why he was asked at various different points of time in many different ways and by different people. And there was one particular person, the head of production, who he has a very good relationship with, and he trusts. And she's the one, I think, who was very much saying, if we can help, please say anything that, we care about you. That's where she would have been coming from on some of the questions.
I can't decide where this line is, because two consenting adults who both work for your company, where is that line between just a gross invasion of privacy? You mentioned your workplace relationship policy. If I, as an adult woman, entered a relationship with a man, who wasn't vastly different in terms of rank or status to me, is it any of your business? Is that?
No, look, I think. It's important, this thing about imbalance. And I feel that's what we've taken seriously. It's not about trying to invade people's private lives and who they see and what they do. It's about the workplace. So some relationships at work, I think we all know, are inevitable. I think the most important thing we can do is to maintain a professional attitude and boundaries, to make sure all of our people know that they have to have a professional attitude and they have to have boundaries to avoid inappropriate behaviour. And that's why we have the code of conduct, the safeguarding policy, the speaking up policy, the workplace relationship policy. The whole thing we are trying to do every day, actually, is to ensure that we have a safe and respectful place where people come to work. So if you cross that boundary, and I think you would say that someone with that kind of different dynamic in power, that was inappropriate. And I think we would have, if we had had any evidence or knowledge of that, if Philip had said that to us, we would have acted swiftly in that we would have investigated and we would have taken action. However that action would be, I can't say because it's hypothetical, because it would depend on when and where. But it was inappropriate to have a relationship with someone so junior in daytime.
Thank you. Many armchair commentators on social media would point out the irony of Parliament speaking to a company about appropriate relationships at work, but I'd like to ask what action would have been appropriate. I know you've said it is hypothetical, but the circumstances are fairly clear and the individuals are known to you. So what would have been appropriate reaction had one of the individuals admitted it and said, we're in a relationship and it's all fine?
I think that's where the context is very, very important. I think the context becomes all important. So rather than going through all the scenarios, I think we have to say it would depend on... We would say this is a deeply inappropriate workplace relationship given the power imbalance. Deeply inappropriate in any context.
Would you have covered that up?
No.
If one of the individuals had admitted a relationship?
Why would... No, I don't think so. I think, it is their private lives, but it is in the workplace. And therefore, if once it is in the workplace, I think it does become something that we wouldn't in any way try to cover up in any way.
And would you have taken one of your biggest stars and someone who nationally was everyone was so fond of, would you have removed him from...
Yes, I think if that was necessary, if the context gave us that, if the investigation said, that things have emerged that are deeply inappropriate in the workplace, and I think if we'd known that at the time, we'd have acted very swiftly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Julie.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. Good morning. One of the things I want to ask about is Phillip Schofield has said that he got Person X's jobs on other ITV shows that he worked on. Were you or other members of IT management aware that he'd got this person jobs on other programmes that he worked on? And is that usual that stars have that preferential treatment of people?
Right, so I think I'll answer that, and Kevin can come in here. I think the first thing to know is that when it's been reported that he's a PA and a personal runner, that doesn't exist at ITV. No runner is a personal runner for anyone. There is a pool of runners. There are 3 on daytime on this morning, and they all share the work. So Person X was working for Eamon Holmes and Ruth Langsford, as well as Holly, as well as Philip. So that's the first fact that I think is very important. And we don't have PAs. We have PAs, but they're not runners. So that's important. I think, Kevin, would you answer the question about how it works in terms of what people ask for and what they don't ask for?
Yeah, it is common for presenters, performers to want a sort of familiar crew around them. Certainly, always, I would say, with sort of glam teams, as they're called, with the dressers and the makeup artists and things like that. Less so, perhaps, with runners, though I don't think this is the only occasion. I would say, certainly for researchers, for writers that they trust and know, and things like that. So they do move around. I think, as I mentioned before, remember, this morning is slightly unusual in that it never ends, so it's just on forever. Other programmes, can have a very short production period, and it's not that unusual for producers to bring people over, for presenters to say, "Oh, can I have that nice researcher that worked for us? He was seeing very bright," whatever it is. So it's not that unusual, no.
And I think on what you're referring to, I think actually the agent requested Person X. It didn't come direct. The agent requested it. Didn't come direct from Philip.
Yes, it would nearly always be the agent that would contact not us, but the producer or whoever was responsible on the show for hiring this level of person to say, "Oh, Philip would like this person to work on, is that all right, can we do that? And then it would be handled by the production team.
And didn't we find out that person X was asked for by other talent?
Yes, I think he was asked. I think actually Eamon and Ruth asked for him to, because everyone thought very well of him. Could he come and work? I think she was doing work for QVC or something, and could he come and kind of help out on that? And I think he did, and things like that. So there is a lot of movement.
Whereas I can understand it for things like makeup artists and things that are very personal, and you can have that rapport and think somebody does your makeup very well or whatever. The runner, it's a different type of job. Do you think if this happens, which clearly you're saying it does, that it's appropriate to do that? Is it appropriate for stars to have that level of input in those kind of decisions?
You know, the thing is, what I would say, what I've seen, because I've gone to a lot of live shows, and what I see is that what a runner will do is just get everything organised. Taxis, take them to the taxi, get the taxi in the right place, make sure there's some food in the dressing room, water in the dressing room, whatever you want there, whatever you want here. That's what a runner does. I mean, a runner just does, makes life easy for whoever they're working for on the show, and often they're working for an entire show. And so I've personally seen how runners help on Dancing on Ice, for instance, or on The Voice, for instance. Runners come to every show when they're being produced live. I mean, that's certainly my take on it, but I don't, what do you think?
And they tend to work, remember, runners are usually just used for a couple of days when the show is actually being recorded. So for production last week's, but they may be not around during the week, but they're on set to help get everything done on the day.
But Julie, you could be right. I mean, as I say, we are not complacent about this. If with the Casey review, in fact ourselves, when we start looking through again, if there is something where we could tighten up how runners maybe register what they do or something, there may be something there. Because you're right, they're runners and they're very happy. They want to do well, and most runners are actually very ambitious. They don't want to stay as runners. They want to become.
They make things tick. If we're being honest.
And they really make things tick. Yeah, so there may be something there.
Phillip Schofield announced his departure from this morning, as he said, on the 20th of May, and he said, "I understand ITV has decided the current situation can't go on." Who made that decision?
I did, I suppose, ultimately, in that, but these things are collective, and they're a discussion between producers and the head of daytime and various other people involved. Constant dialogue with the agent when it's as big a thing as this. But
if I can just expand the question a bit, what do you think the situation was that couldn't go on?
I think it was the media speculation. It was amongst the staff, amongst some of them, it was this is sort of relentless. Will it ever go away? How can we make this sort of programme with all this scrutiny? And I think everybody came to the opinion. Philip didn't argue against it or anything. I think everyone felt it to come to a natural point.
I remember the whole court appearance of Philip's brother, and all of that whole thing was playing out just before all of this, and there were lots of rumours that about him as a result of his brother being in court and all the very awful things that emerged there. So I think the pressure on him was just enormous, actually.
And on the 20th of May, when you said you look for, and you've sort of answered a bit of this, but you look forward to continuing our relationship with Phillip Schofield. Did his resignation from ITV days later take you by surprise?
Yes, because it was completely due to the fact that he'd lied to us all this time, and he realised, I think, that it would be untenable to work with all these people that he'd been directly lying over years to us about. So I didn't have to make the decision about removing him from the instant thing was these soap awards that I mentioned, because he chose to step down and said, I'm actually leaving media completely. But certainly he felt he couldn't really expect us to carry on employing him after he'd lied over such an important issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just quickly take you back to the issue of runners? There are reports that this young man made his own showreel on the This Morning set at ITV's expense, using all the production team that were in and around the set at that time, after normal working hours. Is that a sort of facility that's made available to all runners?
I think if requested, it would normally be granted. I think if suddenly there was a floodgate and 30 people were in a line saying, I want to do a show reel. But I think if you're, as we now know, very friendly with the presenters, because in effect it's a minimum. I think it was one camera or something. I don't know. But it's about having Philip and Holly prepared to stay on for 15 minutes afterwards to talk to you about to do your show reel. So I think it's that. So this wouldn't be the first time.
It was Philip, it was Holly, there was a cookery section, wasn't there? I mean, surely that this must have been over and above the sort of support that ITV would have offered. Surely this shows some kind of preferential treatment.
Well, none of us would have known that show reel was being made, and I would say that actually, I've just said, I think runners are usually very ambitious, and they will want to make their books, they will want to do their video reels, they will want that because they want other jobs, they want to show what they can do. And so I don't know of another instance, but I wouldn't know. I mean, it just wouldn't occur to me that somebody else would do this. But I think the fact that most of it, as far as I saw, was a cut and paste of some other programmes, but he did interview Phil, and he did interview Holly, and he did interview Ruth and Eamon on this show reel, and I'm not sure that would have aroused in daytime much. I mean, if the head of daytime had been worried about that, she would have done something about it. She'd have called him aside and said, what were you doing? Why were you doing it? That's company resources. I think generally people are very encouraging of runners. They want them to do well.
To be clear, this is a service that would be equally open to any other runners that were working on this morning.
You'd have to get, it would be very informal, of course, and so you'd need the producer to agree, and the crew, whatever members of the crew you needed, they would have to agree, and in this case, Philip and Holly and Eamon and Ruth would have had to agree. So you'd have to be on pretty friendly terms or good terms or whatever to get everyone to say, yes, of course we'll hang around for 20 minutes and help you out.
But your question is, would we do this for anybody else? I think if as long as it was not getting in the way of the show, and we could help people, whatever level they are, to get their next role, we would do that. We're very encouraging of that.
You're not aware of any other runners who?
Well, I mean, we haven't looked, to be honest. We haven't
might be worth
asked.
Adding to your inquiry.
Sure.
Thank you, Rupa.
Thanks, Chair, and hi everyone. Yeah, just sorry if I've missed this, but did Phillip Schofield have any role in helping the young man secure employment at ITV in the first place?
So he introduced Person X into ITV. Carla, do you want to do the date sequence of this? Sure, because it's quite important, and the age.
Of course. So Person X first got employment with ITV when in 2016 when they were 20 years old. The previous year they had done some work experience. We now understand, looking back into it and having seen the Phillip Schofield interview at the time, or interview a couple of weeks ago, that he passed the Person X asked for some work experience. Philip passed details of who to contact at ITV. The individual filled in a form in the normal way. To put this into context, we do about 250 work placements a year. There are about 50 to 60 in daytime each year. The individual filled in that the connection was a family friend, that he was a family friend of Phillip Schofield. No one thought anything of that. Many people put forward individuals who are family friends for work experience. We will have a lot of that at ITV. He did his work experience age 19 for roughly 2 weeks. He came back the following year and did some more work experience and impressed people. People thought, and I think anyone who has commented, who has known the individual who has commented over the last few weeks, I think everyone has said that he was an impressive individual and much liked and did a good job. He did well in his work placement, and as with all runners who do well in a work placement, they're put into what's called the runner pool, sort of a rota, where if there are gaps or vacancies, they can be called upon to work on programmes. So he went in to the runner pool, which is not managed by any of the talent. It is managed by our production team and HR team, and he was offered a short contract when he was 20 in 2016, did well in that, and that became a longer-term fixed contract with ITV.
Because all of us get emails all the time from people wanting work experience, and I mean, I always say I only take paid staff, so there is it's not what you know, it's who you know in the whole work experience field.
No, it's a really good point. We do a number of different things on work experience. We don't really want to do, I mean, altruistically we want to do a lot of work experience, but actually it's quite a hard thing to do because you have to chaperone people who come in for work experience, so it's intense on resources, and you have to do a good work experience program. So this was 10 days and will have been done properly. So you're absolutely right, because we all get these emails about work experience. We do work, just so you know, very formally. We have a very formal way of doing this as well. We work with Creative Access, so that we can give work experience to people from very, very different backgrounds, so that we get social mobility and we get diversity and we get, you know, a whole range of people that would not get opportunities because they would not know someone who would be able to do this. So we do that. But in addition to that, in our policy it says you can, as someone who works at ITV, what you can do is just you can put them in to the right person. So there's a line manager that deals with it, and then if they can do it, they do it, and if they can't do it, they don't do it. So those are the two channels for work experience at ITV.
Just something else you said is that sort of agents were involved. Just I'm trying to understand, is it YMU, the management company or something? Just what's their role in this? Because you told us when you were first aware of rumours swirling around and you started probing a bit, would they, if they had been aware of concerns, would they have said anything, or are they a supplier that doesn't want to fall out with ITV?
No, they're not a supplier. Kevin can explain this.
Yes, that YMU is a large agency of mainly presenters and so forth, and we've had a long working relationship with them. Sorry, what's your question? If they knew
like what their relationship with ITV?
It's.
Would they have raised alarm bells, or would they not want
yes,
to?
Yes, they would.
I think
they certainly would if they thought something surprising, untoward, or
even a production company if there's such a
yes,
thing.
They would probably first off go to the producer of whatever show was relevant here, because that would be their contact. That would be the producer, in effect, that chose the hiring of whoever is on screen. So they would have a regular contact with the producer. I mean, at a bigger level, they might go to the head of entertainment or the head of daytime or me about what's going on. So I think you would like to think if they knew of something, they would have said it. And because we did speak to them a lot over this particular issue, over the couple of years or whatever it was, they just constantly denied that anything untoward was going on.
And I think, they made it very clear that they did not know anything. In fact, they had lawyers working on behalf of Phillip to defend him because he had denied it to them so strenuously. And you were in a number of meetings with them, with the lawyers, because we were asking them questions about of Phillip. So our relationship with them is they represent our presenters, and therefore we negotiate contracts with them, but they don't supply us. I mean, they're not as...
They don't make programs.
They don't make programs.
And you've instructed a KC, so obviously you're taking it very seriously, to review the facts of this case. Are those results going to be published in full so we can all see?
The findings will be published.
And just is that normal for your normal complaints procedure? How independent is your complaints procedure? I know from watching both Morning Show, which sometimes this saga feels like, and Succession, people kind of joke about internal investigations. They can be used for many purposes, can't they?
That is TV. I'm afraid that's fiction. But
true,
anyway,
but this
we'll get on
like
to the
fiction
facts.
And faction and reality are all merging.
So we take all complaints very seriously, whether they're raised informally or formally, whether they're raised. We've got very clear grievance procedures and how things need to be handled, disciplinary procedures. So if someone raises an issue internally, it will be assessed by HR.
Your own HR department, or an independent, this is a QC. It's
in the first instance, just to ascertain the facts. If someone raises an issue and it's an HR-related issue, our HR team will assess the facts. They will then work out whether it's something that a formal investigation into it. If we have a formal investigation, depending on the facts, not in every case, but in many cases, what we will do is ensure that the investigating manager, so a senior manager within ITV, is brought in, but from outside outside the relevant department. So, for example, in one of the cases which has been widely covered in the media recently, where the individual was not named, but it's been widely covered that they raised issues about bullying and inappropriate behaviours in the workplace. The HR team called in a senior manager who actually was one of our heads of news from elsewhere in the organisation to come in and be the independent investigating person. And that they conducted with HR support, they conducted a review into that particular case, looked at all of the allegations, looked at the documentation, interviewed a raft of people, and in that case I can say, it hasn't been said publicly, but none of the allegations were upheld in that particular case. So in that case we did it internally, but with an external, outside the relevant department, senior manager as the investigating manager. In the case of Dr. Range, as Carolyn has said, we instructed an external HR company called HR Clarity, who conducted an external investigation. We look at each situation and the facts as they stand, and the severity of the allegations that are swirling, and decide whether it's more appropriate to do something internally or externally. So it's not one size fits all.
Okay. And you mentioned Dr. Rand raised a complaint. Is it the same as the GMC, the Law Society, that BAME people get complained about more than non-BAME people? I don't know if you've done these figures.
Well, that people of colour complain more, do you mean?
About.
I
know you raised the complaint. I don't know if you know that.
I don't know those statistics.
I mean, given that, how many complaints have we had?
So can I just say that over the last 5 years, we've looked at the statistics. We thought you might be interested in them. There have been 128 complaints.
Sorry. Actually, I think this is going to be coming to later. I was just interested in the BAME thing, if you want to.
Well, now that I've started, so 128 complaints which have been investigated by our HR team, either formally or informally, across ITV, across the last 5 years. And of those, 5 related to this morning, 5 of those complaints of the 128 across the last 5 years. And as we've said earlier, 2 of those related to bullying or harassment, and both of those have been discussed so far today.
And just last one from me. We know that Phillip Schofield's previous co-presenter, Fern Britton, apparently left because she was paid £225,000 less than him. Is there differential pay for the same role in your organisation?
That's sort of 12 or 15 years ago, I think.
Right, so everything's all overhauled.
I think you'll find that everything has changed quite a lot. Yeah.
So Philip and Holly
on equal pay.
Philip and Holly on the same.
It depends on the individual show.
Could you just repeat that? What did you just say?
Yeah, I would say Philip and Holly were on the same wage because they were doing the same job. But probably not, although it was a long time ago, not when they started, because she would have been junior and he was already well established, sort of thing. But we've made it a policy now that when people are clearly doing the same job, like panellists on a show or something, they should be paid equally.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Rupa. Can I just quickly go back to the KC review? If there's anything that Ms Mulcahy finds that's outside of the terms of reference that you've published, what will you do to ensure that these are appropriately treated?
So I'll just start and I'll hand over to Kyla. We've said really clearly, there's a paragraph in the terms of reference that say if anything comes up that is not in scope, she will capture those and she'll bring them to the attention of the board.
And once that review is concluded, depending on the findings clearly, will you be potentially reviewing the position of any ITV staff?
Look, I think we're taking the review, as you can see, extremely seriously. We wouldn't have initiated if it wasn't very serious. I would say that we will listen to everything that's said, but I don't want to get into hypotheticals or preempt the KC review or prejudge it.
How potentially might you hold people to account depending on these findings?
Well, as I said, I think that depending on the findings, We will listen and we will learn and we will act. But I don't know what the findings are going to be, so I'm not going to go into a hypothetical situation that I don't know of yet.
What other parameters are, I mean, worst case scenario?
I don't want to talk about scenarios that we don't know yet, Chair. I'm afraid that we would just be speculating as to what the findings are going to say. And the reason we've got a KC is to take away speculation and to look at the process, to look at the facts, to look at our approach, and then to come out with some findings. She will be able to interview anybody that she wants. She will be able to go anywhere she wants with her terms of reference. And so there will be nothing to hide.
But if it was found that there was basically a cover-up at ITV this morning over this, people could be sacked?
As I said, I don't want to get into hypotheticals because that is hypothetical currently.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Can I just say what I don't think this is about? I don't think this is about whether Holly now hates Philip and whether Eamon's in the huff with Holly and Kevin. That seems to me to be utterly irrelevant. I think it probably benefits ITV for the tabloids to chase this particular hare or that set of hares. I think what this is about bullying and protection of staff. I think that's what the issue is, and I think that's why we're here, and that's why we want to talk to you about it. In that context, what did you feel, Dame Carolyn, when you, after weeks of bullying headlines, you saw the editor of This Morning, Martin Frizzell, tell a reporter in answer to her question that he didn't like aubergines?
I think you asked this of my colleague Magnus Brook, and I think he said it was ill-advised, and I couldn't agree with him more. I think Martin has made a mistake. I think he knows he made a mistake. I think he didn't intend for it to come. I don't think he intended to say that, but I don't know.
He did, though. He was looking out the window. He saw there was a crew there. By the way, an ITV pool crew. There's been some speculation that he said that because it was a Sky crew, but it was an ITV pool crew that he said that to. He knew they were outside. He came out. He looked as if he thought he was coming out with a clever line. That's how he looked.
Well, look, what I would say is that, Kevin has actually spoken to him and he can talk to that. I don't believe anything Martin said there in the heat of the moment was reflective of our culture. I don't.
I think why it matters.
Made a mistake.
It matters not because it was a ridiculous and absurd and possibly vulgar thing to say. It matters because he's the boss of that programme. It's a programme that is mired now with allegations of bullying. He knew that. And if you're a young staffer, before this whole stooshy began, if you were a young staffer, he was the person that you'd go to if you're worried about bullying. I know you told us that you could respond anonymously, but he was the boss of that programme. That says a lot about the culture at that programme, that he took such a mocking and dismissive attitude towards bullying.
Well, I think you're reading an awful lot into one comment, which was a foolish comment. I absolutely agree, and a very ill-advised comment. I absolutely agree. I think to read into an entire culture of an organisation or a programme from one comment from one person who probably was a bit under pressure, regardless of the crew on his doorstep, he probably was. He is used to handling pressure. He should be able to handle it. He made a mistake.
Right. Well, I'm not.
So he made a mistake.
I'm not. If he had a saintly reputation and there was no questions of bullying from anybody else, then you're right. That was just a single mistake. But like other members of the committee, I've had so many messages from folk at ITV who talk about the bullying culture of ITV. Now, it seems to me this morning, you've talked about loads of investigations and they all seem to end up with ITV coming out smelling of roses. So I want to give a voice to a couple of people who've written to me. I've done my very best to ascertain that these are real people, either current or ex-staffers. I won't identify them in any way. Here's one. I worked for a boss at daytime, somebody senior. My boss was very difficult and would, as a matter of course, often shout and belittle staff. It went on for years with nobody doing anything about it. It was a toxic environment. That's one person. Here's another person. I'm very pleased to see your committee address the culture of bullying and toxicity at ITV. It's a terrible place to work. Daytime in particular is absolutely toxic. Here's how it works. If someone complains about bullying or sexual impropriety, ITV pretends to investigate. They'll do a bit of a cursory glance at the complaint. Then they will answer, and they will decide that there was no bullying. The person who complains is then ultimately forced to leave, often with a non-disclosure agreement, and it's made clear to them that they can't return to the work because they've made false accusations.
So they're very disappointing to hear, deeply distressing, in my view, to hear.
Dozens of them.
Well, could you please hand those to us? I mean, I think that
I'm promised to do that because people are very concerned that the way that they write or little clues within their messages might identify them.
You just said they no longer work there.
I said some did and some did not.
Well, the thing I have to say is that it is not something I recognise that characterises the whole culture at all. We've told you that we have had 5 complaints in 5 years on daytime, and we've taken all of them seriously, and only 2 of them were about bullying and any kind of question around discrimination of role. So what I would say...
How come people are so unhappy? How come people are so...
Mr. Nicholson?
I'll let you come back in. How come people are so unhappy and so many people are unhappy, and yet you keep doing investigations which keep ending up showing that there wasn't a problem?
So can I just say, if we don't know of these, I've said we've had 2 official complaints. Both of them were investigated, one internally, which Kyla has explained how we did that, and one was not investigated internally, deliberately, so that we could find out what was independently, that the person who did that had absolutely no involvement in ITV. They were an HR specialist, and they were not able to uphold the allegations. So I think what I'm saying to you is it's not loads of investigations. We have investigated whenever we've had a complaint, and we take it very, very seriously. It does not fill me with anything but just sorrow, really, and sadness. I've never... it's not something that we try and instill or foster. It is the antithesis of what we want. So if you are getting many people calling you, I honestly feel there is a confidential way that you can let them speak to us, because that's the way we can actually look at this properly and do something about it. We will do something about it.
All right, I'll ask them.
Yes, please.
Okay,
because I can't do anything if they're telling you about it.
I'll ask them.
Because I run ITV.
I'll ask them, though I think there's a trust issue.
Well, I don't think, I genuinely think that if there is a trust issue within daytime, which you're trying to describe, which because you have knowledge that I don't, because you've been talking to people, then there are other ways that they can talk to us that don't betray any trust issues with daytime.
We'll happily give you the details of Safe Call to pass on to them if you feel comfortable doing that, Mr. Nicholson. So that that's the external, confidential, it can be anonymous helpline. And also, as we look into these, if there's anything that needs to go into the KC review, we will be passing it on.
Right. Now, Dame Carolyn, this morning you've talked about the ways in which ITV talked to Mr. X about the situation at ITV. And I've written down, you've called it a review twice, I think, and an investigation once.
I've never called it an investigation. I actually said to the
I
chair,
heard you say that, but then you subsequently used the word investigation.
I might have said investigated, because I think what we do is that we did investigate, but I wouldn't call it an investigation, because that gives it a kind of formality and structure that, because of the rumours and because of the time period, it didn't have.
Okay, I've spoken to someone who's friendly with Mr. X, who says that he felt that the review, the investigations that took place, made it quite difficult for him to talk, and he was under a lot of pressure not to talk. He quotes one particular conversation with a manager, and the words used were, "Is everything okay between you and Philip?" Those were the words used. And he didn't, I'm told, feel that he could really answer that with any candour because, well, for all the reasons that we understand. He also, I'm told, feels that he left the programme and didn't want to. Now, I've heard a number of different people describe his move to Loose Women as a promotion that he applied for. Can you confirm that of his own volition he applied for this job and that his job there was a promotion?
Okay, I'll just go back to some of the things you've just outlined. Difficult to talk because he was under pressure not to talk. So we'd need to understand from whom, because in every conversation he's had with the head of production, he has actually not only felt less pressure when talking to her, because she has been so supportive and helpful of him.
Well, Phillip Schofield didn't want him to reveal to anybody the relationship.
But that's a very different issue. That's a very different matter, saying Philip didn't want him, and I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't know, because I don't have that information. But if Philip was putting him under pressure, ITV were not putting him under pressure on anything. We were actually asking. He was coming to us for counselling and for other things, and we were helping him to be able to talk freely to us without anybody else in the organisation even knowing about it. So I want
to apply for a job at Loose Women.
I come on to that, but I want to be very clear that it's Philip that was putting him under pressure and not ITV that was putting him under pressure, because they're two quite separate things, and it's very important we stick to facts here. And the fact of the Loose Women issue is that he absolutely applied for that job and he got it, and it was a promotion. But if we just track back, he actually applied for a job on this morning as a researcher, and Kyla will give you the dates, before he applied for Loose Women, and he didn't get the job on this morning. He went through a recruitment process, he didn't get the job. He then applied for a job on Loose Women with 29 other applicants in the process, and he got the job. And I think we have to remember, we're talking about person X, it's very hard to know. He was an extremely capable, very confident young person. He really was, and he impressed people he came across. So he was ambitious.
You've said that about his ambition before, and I take that point. Anyway, I'm just relaying to you that his friend has told me that he didn't actually want to leave, and indeed that somebody was removed from Loose Women in order to give him the post.
There is no evidence for us. We have looked at the process, we have looked at the procedure, we have looked at the line manager who interviewed him, and we have looked at the other applicants. So, I mean,
we have looked into this in real detail because we're aware of the allegations that there are out there. And our HR teams have absolutely confirmed, as Carolyn has outlined, this was in 2019, to get my dates right, 2019, that he applied for a transfer. He was looking for a promotion. My understanding, it's not, I mean, Kevin is obviously much closer to the world of production and runners, but people don't become a runner to be a runner for life.
No, of course.
You're a runner and you look for
I understand
a promotion, and this was a promotion.
Production secretary is a promotion.
If you don't mind, let's whiz on a wee bit, because we've a lot to get through. I've spoken to a number of different people at the programme, current and former employees. They say it was a bit of an open secret what was going on between him and Phillip Schofield. People knew about it. You know, the show reel that the chair described obviously isn't a normal thing to happen. We know that. I worked in TV. Most rare for a runner to be afforded that kind of time and privileged access. When he was hired, did anybody find out what his history was with Phillip Schofield? Did they check when Phillip Schofield first met him, which, as you know, was when he was very young? Did anybody discover that Phillip Schofield had followed him on social media when he was very young? Did anybody look into that or notice that, or has that all been a surprise to you?
So why don't I take that? No one looked into the detail at the time. As I say, this was an individual, one of 50 to 60 work placements on daytime when he came for 1.5 weeks work experience, noting that Phillip Schofield was a family friend. There were no alarm bells. There was nothing to see in that. We will have many similar applications for work experience where someone lists family friend across ITV. So no one looked back into
And we
that.
wouldn't do that, Mr. Nicholson, for any work experience person. We wouldn't look into background. We would either give them work experience or we wouldn't be able to give them work experience because we couldn't do it.
And he was 19 and fully supervised through his time there.
Do you know who's paying for his lawyer at the moment? Because press reports are that Phillip Schofield's paying for the lawyer.
My understanding is that Phillip Schofield is paying for it. I think Phillip mentioned that in the BBC interview, but we don't get involved in that.
My understanding is that's not true. His lawyers are working pro bono because they're concerned about some of the issues in the case. But you've been in touch with him recently?
Person X?
Yes.
Or Phillip Schofield?
No, Person X.
Yes.
Can I just check how many people approached senior management with concerns about presenters, editors, or the culture at this morning? Can I turn to you, Mr. Lygo, about this?
What came to me directly with complaining about behaviour or something?
Yeah.
I don't think any that I can recall, honestly.
Well, that's funny because I have a copy of an email, and it says, I understand it's from ITV, referring to you. In our meeting Monday the 4th of October 2021, you referred to your concerns about the conduct of Phillip Schofield and another colleague working on this morning. I'm not able to share all the details, but I can find no evidence to suggest that Kevin Lygo failed to take action on the allegations that you have raised with him. It's not a question of him not being interested in the concerns. He is interested in the concerns, and he does take the allegations that you have raised seriously. So there's an example of somebody who did contact you. Can't tell you who it is without permission.
Okay, well...
But this is an email from ITV.
Someone at ITV to me?
Somebody senior at ITV to the person who made the complaint.
No, it's someone from someone for you to the complainant.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
we'll need to see that.
I'll need to check that, sorry.
Okay, because that seems quite significant. We've talked about non-disclosure agreements a number of times today, and you've confirmed that Mr. X has not been asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement, though he was given a payoff, wasn't he?
I wouldn't characterise it as a payoff. His role was made redundant, and he...
Was he staff?
After lockdown.
He was a fixed-term contractor, so staff, we treat them in exactly the same way he'd been on fixed-term contracts throughout his time at ITV.
Is that normal to give payoffs to folk who are non-staff?
It's normal at ITV. It was an absolutely standard process. I have spoken to our Chief People Officer who has confirmed that. His settlement agreement that he entered into was completely standard. There is a very clear carve-out for whistleblowing, speaking up, and the payment, I understand, was absolutely standard, formulaic, as we would have paid to anyone else at that level.
It was a redundancy.
It was a redundancy
because his role was
situation.
redundant post-COVID.
Okay. Yesterday, the BBC said to us that they were going to release people from non-disclosure agreements that they'd signed in the past, unless it was specifically to do with commercial confidentiality. Are ITV prepared to do the same?
I think we have any.
Well, to the extent that there are non-disclosure agreements that were entered into historically, I don't know where those would be or what period of time, then yes.
I mean, at the moment, I would have no knowledge of an NDA other than for commercial matters. So
other than commercial matters,
at the moment, I don't have any. I have no knowledge that we have signed NDAs. If we have anything historically that we don't know about, we will look into that. But we would have no reason, I think, to sign NDAs.
Well, you're saying something a bit more cautious than Miss Mullins, because Miss Mullins a second ago said yes, people would be released from those, and you're saying that you'd look into it. Is it look into or release?
No, really, both. I mean, we need to find out if there are any.
Right, but I've phrased my question carefully. We're not talking about commercial NDAs with commercial sensitivity. just NDAs that, for example, might refer to payoffs for bullying or other matters like that?
Well, can I say, let's be clear about this. We don't have any contracts that would say that they couldn't speak up about bullying or harassment or sexual harassment or anything like that. That there is, Kyla already referred to this, there is a carve-out that is quite clear in any agreement, a standard agreement that we would do.
Good. And just to go back to my previous question, Mr. Lygo, I'll ask for permission to send you that email, but just for the record, you're saying that to the best of your recollection, you had no meetings with anybody where they talked about bullying culture or inappropriate behaviour with regard to Phillip Schofield?
Yeah, I'm pretty certain I would remember if they were talking about...
Well, I would have thought so. I just ask one final question. Can you confirm that daytime production staff at This Morning referred to their audience in production meetings as tower block Tracies?
As what, sorry?
Tower block Tracies.
I've never heard that phrase.
I have never heard that.
A number of people have told me that.
I've never heard that.
Seems
I don't even
truly
quite know
dismissive. If an idea is regarded as too highbrow,
well,
I'm told people say, would that really appeal to the tower block Tracies? I agree.
Never heard that.
It's a horrible thing to say.
Yeah,
a horrible thing to say.
It's not what ITV would be looking at as a target audience, right? We wouldn't describe our target audience in that way. And I do know one thing, which is that the daytime team on every show really cares about the audience. So that surprises me.
Sure.
Thank you, John. Can I just go back a little bit? Are staff ever involved in, are your on-screen talent ever, or presenters ever able to have staff moved from roles or jobs?
Do you mean removed?
Yeah. So say, are staff ever moved on from roles within ITV at the request of presenters or other on-screen talent?
I don't know of an instance, but I suppose it is possible that if a producer or a presenter found somebody very difficult or awkward or something, they might say, I'm finding it very difficult to work with that person, and then maybe an appropriate action would be taken. But I don't know of an example.
Any examples, and would that ring any alarm bells?
No.
Okay. Sam?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I want to talk more generally, not talking about any specific case, because I think we've covered that ad nauseum this morning, about the training that ITV provides its managers on safeguarding and managing complaints. As a former ITV manager myself, I remember within weeks of being employed, put on a safeguarding course. I can't pretend I remember all of the course now, it's been several years, but could you outline the training that is provided and how far that training is provided amongst managers? Because obviously I worked in news, there's entertainment, there's factual, there's so many different departments. How widespread is that safeguarding training?
It's widespread. So, the first thing to do is training is important. We do it both online, we do it offline, and we do it on the job. So there are we see it as three different types of training, because sometimes on-the-job training is more valuable in some ways than filling in online forms, mandatory training. So do you want to talk a little bit about the process?
Yeah, so our general process when anyone joins ITV, they do mandatory training. There is very specific training around our code of conduct, so we're very, very clear what the expectations of individuals are. And then that training then takes place annually. Every year, it's mandatory for everyone who is at ITV. It's not purely on the code of ethics and conduct. It's on other key policies that we have to try and make sure that people are up to date, they're focused on it. We also have a very extensive awareness programme, not just around our specific policies, but around speaking up. So we train our managers. We have specific training for our managers to make sure that they know how to handle complaints if they come into them directly. Obviously, our HR staff are continually trained in that, and my legal team also are trained on a regular basis on what to do if complaints come in. We brought in a director of corporate compliance and ethics 2 years ago to oversee all this entire programme, to make sure that it's given the focus and the training and the traction, that we get the traction that we really need.
Did you say it was yearly? So there's yearly refreshers?
Yes, it's
and how long has that been the case?
Oh gosh, I don't have that detail, but certainly for the last 5 years, if not.
Yeah, so just to clarify then, if you join ITV,
yes,
what level of management get to do this training?
All staff.
All staff?
All staff.
All staff, okay.
And if anyone doesn't do it, then that should be flagged and HR follow up.
Okay, and that's obviously, that because you have so many sites across the country, how much of that is virtual and how much is that in person? I remember my training course being in person.
Well, certainly a lot of it is virtual. We do both, as Carolyn said. It's a multi-pronged attack, but certainly the mandatory training, it's online. It can be tracked. People are notified. We used to do it in one fell swoop and it'd be several hours of mandatory training. We've decided this year that actually that is quite a lot for anyone to do and to really absorb and engage appropriately with. So we're now splitting the mandatory training modules across the year. So there are several to do every couple of months. And it's tracked online. So we track who is doing it, who has missed a deadline, they're reminded, there is follow-up. And we make it clear that if people do not complete their mandatory training, that it could end up being a disciplinary matter.
Has anyone not completed their mandatory training and then ended up with a disciplinary issue?
I don't have that detail. Certainly what I do know is that there are regular, because my team work very closely with HR, for the those offenders who have missed a deadline, there are very targeted and individual reminders, and we also get the line manager involved now to make sure. So whether this was, apologies, I'm not sure when you were involved at ITV, but whether this was in your day or what we're doing now, as we said earlier, this is evolving. We're always looking for best practice and new ways to make sure that people actually really absorb and this traction around our policies.
And just to build on that, Simon, there's also some things that are very specific to news, which will be amplified in news, very specific to dramas that have children not working on them, or disability, for instance. We've had a drama which had 2 disabled stars in it. The safeguarding requirements on those would be amplified and bespoke to those. So there is mandatory generalised training, but also quite specific on production, depending on the kind of production.
Without wanting to go back on the substance of the previous part of this session this morning, obviously you've got a KC reviewing all that. I don't want to go into it, but do you think there could be lessons to learn that could be used to enhance the training you provide off the back of this review?
Look, I hope we've been very open with you that we don't have any complacency. We don't think we do everything right. We have learned enormously on duty of care how to refine, upgrade, enhance, develop, and we will continue to do that. And I think this is a similar situation, which is we will listen and we will absolutely learn and act if anything emerges from the findings, and undoubtedly there will be things to learn.
If there were findings there, for example, that felt that there were pitfalls and problems that you hadn't seen before, would you then perhaps bring forward a refreshing training course for people?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you very much. Can I just talk to you a little bit more broadly about some of the other programmes that ITV is responsible for? How do you respond to the allegations made by Rebecca Ferguson regarding the treatment of contestants who appeared on The X Factor?
Could you just repeat the question? I didn't hear the middle of it.
How do you respond to the allegations made by Rebecca Ferguson regarding the treatment of contestants on The X Factor?
Okay, I mean, look, the first thing I want to say is we take her allegations. They go back to 2010 or 2011. We obviously would take that seriously. We are the broadcaster of that. So a lot of what we've been talking about shows that we make, and a lot of our training, etc., is all about shows that we make. There is another company involved in making The X Factor, and I'll just hand over to Kevin, and then maybe you can come in on Rebecca.
Sure.
Yes, remember when, as a broadcaster, we commission shows from third parties as well as from our own production arm. So, we impose kind of very tight restrictions, the same as we would on our own production companies, on things like duty of care and all that aspect of it. Here is our duty of care file in case anybody would like to see it. It's many pages long. So that would have been back then, I assume, part of the contractual obligations. But on the ground, it's up to the producer really, on a day-to-day basis, to check that everything that we've required for them to do is being done. We would follow up with spot checks, we'd have a debrief after the show and everything. But whilst the show is in production, it's got to be the preserve of the production company, whether it's ours or whether it's a third party. On Rebecca Ferguson, I wasn't there, I don't know the detail.
Yeah, I think it's also fair to say that our duty of care requirements of third-party producers has increased significantly since 2019. So we have a completely different way of dealing with third-party producers on duty of care now than we did before 2019, 2018.
Yeah. So Rebecca Ferguson did raise some issues with us in 2021. She did refer to her time, and bearing in mind this dated back to 2010. And she had various complaints about how she and other individuals, other participants on the X Factor were treated and handled. My legal team immediately got in touch with Fremantle Thames, the producer, because they are the people who will have entered into contracts with all of the participants. We, ITV, don't. We enter into a contract with Fremantle for the show. We don't enter into a contract with any of the participants, but we raised all of the issues with them. They responded to all of those, and I think the key message was that actually the issues where Rebecca Ferguson was suggesting that things needed to change, there needed to be a different approach to the music industry, how the music industry deals with young people, entering record contracts and how companies like Fremantle run things. There was confirmation on pretty much, I think, every point that she raised, that actually things had moved on and moved on quite significantly, and that they took the duty of care very seriously, and there had been changes in the industry. That was passed back to Rebecca, and so when she then said, well, are we going to investigate this? Our response, and I know it's been quoted that we refused to launch an investigation. I think we believe genuinely that we had, having spoken to the record company, the production company, and having been very clear that all of the points where she felt that there needed to be improvements, there genuinely were, and passed that back, that there was nothing really for us as the broadcaster to investigate. And one other point, just which I have referred to, we didn't enter into any contract. We have not at any stage entered into any contract with Rebecca Ferguson or any of the other participants in that show. ITV wouldn't do that. So when she talks about releasing of NDAs or other contracts, we are not the party to those.
But when Sarah Clark, the Chief Operations Officer, responded to Rebecca Ferguson, she refused to meet her, and she refused to launch any kind of probe into how talent was treated at ITV when Rebecca was a. Do you not think that there's a kind of arrogance in sort of dismissing her concerns and saying we've dealt with this, there's nothing to see here, and in actual fact this was one of our independent contractors anyway, so it wasn't really our responsibility? I mean, that to me seems an unbelievably arrogant.
We've said that, Chair. I honestly don't think that's our attitude to this.
No one even met with Rebecca,
with Fremantle. But we've replied. We asked the producer to deal with it, just as we would deal with it as a producer on behalf of the broadcast. The broadcaster is broadcasting the show, and as Kevin says, we now particularly have very strict requirements on duty of care. In 2010-11, Fremantle would have been dealing with that. They would have been dealing with that day to day. And so Sarah Clark put that through to Fremantle because they're the producer, and said, actually, if Rebecca was going to meet with anybody, should have been Fremantle. They're still alive and well.
Yes, and if I could also say, that was the response to the second email from, or letter from Rebecca Ferguson. The first letter, which raised various points, was responded to in detail, with input, obviously, as I've said, from Fremantle. So it was responded to in detail. When Rebecca came back to say, but should you not launch an investigation, that's when Sarah responded, really, to say, I don't think an investigation is appropriate here. We've responded to all of these issues, and things have clearly moved on. So I don't think it was in any way to be dismissive of Rebecca Ferguson or any of the issues that she has.
Without an investigation, how can you be 100% clear what the issues were and whether things have entirely moved on? I mean, you're just taking Fremantle's word for it, aren't you?
We didn't feel that there was something for ITV as the broadcaster to investigate.
But she actually outlined, I understand, yes, from her first email, all the issues that she identified. And so we could say, against every issue, she identified what had been done on duty of care in the industry, not just simply at ITV.
Does ITV monitor individual programmes and production sets as part of your compliance with the duty of care charter,
yes,
regardless of whether they're
yes,
independent
100%.
or in-house production?
Yes.
Okay, and is that something that's changed since...
I think that has changed quite a lot since 2018. I mean, we always did that. I mean, you can talk better to this, but I mean, there would have always been spot checks. There would have always been people on the ground. But I think what we do now is systematic, from selection to production to post-production. It's systematic, and it's written down. We have a duty of care charter. We have a mental health advisory group. We have 2 medical professionals who work for us, both retained. We have an external advisor. We have Dr. Sandra Scott, who works on shows every day. So we have a huge, comprehensive process of duty of care, and it's systematic.
And what, are you aware of any other potential safeguarding issues concerning any other current or recent ITV shows or presenters?
No, not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
No. And what would you say to the family of Caroline Flack, who've stated that ITV used its talent like commodities?
I think the first thing we'd say is that we genuinely feel deeply, deeply sad about what happened to Caroline. I mean, people knew her well at ITV. This is not something that I can actually talk about that, because I've spoken to a lot of people at ITV that worked with her and really liked working with her, and they loved working with her on the show, because the show was, she loved the show. So that's the first thing I would say. I think, you know, the family are obviously grieving. I would say we don't ever feel, we never feel that we would treat anybody like whether it's a presenter or a member of staff or a junior person that's coming in for work experience. We would really not want to treat anyone like a commodity. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think with Caroline, in that instance, because of things going on in her private life, she said, I don't think I'm fit to do the next series of Love Island. And we said, okay, we understand that. But made it very clear that it was her show. We would get a stand-in, but then she could come back when she wanted to, because she hadn't done anything wrong in our eyes. So I think we were offering her work and all the rest of it. So nobody would agree that we treated her as a commodity.
Is ITV completely unique in the UK in that it has a show that's now linked to 4 suicides, let alone that's a show that's still running on your channel as we speak?
So I think that's a gross misrepresentation of the show, because, and let me break that down. Caroline was not on the show, and the reason that she very tragically took her life, I think she was going through some extremely public things in her private life. So I don't think you can just correlate and say, bang, this is because she's on a show. I think there were 2 other that I'm aware of that you might be referring to. And I think one of the things I would say is that these are, deeply tragic things. Deeply, I mean, no one wants to see anyone, whatever age, take their own life. We've thought about it a huge amount. As I said, I don't think any of you can even understand how deeply distressing something like that would be for people who work at ITV. I've really looked at this in some detail with our, not just with Kevin and Kyla and others, but with people internally. And we've actually taken a lot of professional advice. We've talked to professional advisors. And I think the generally accepted professional opinion is that the causes of the tragedies, of these types of tragedies, are always complex and multiple. And both individuals you're referring to took their lives 2 years after they appeared on a show. And there will have been many, many other events which will have been part of multiple causes. We work with CALM, the Campaign Against Living Miserably. We work with Mind and Young Mind. They're both on our mental health advisory group. And they would say that, and I'm quoting, I think they would say to isolate one event, albeit maybe an important event in their lives, is to really simplify a very complex sequence of events. And so I feel that when you throw that at us, it is very difficult for us, and it makes us sound unfeeling, and we're really, really not. We take it so seriously. As I've said, since 2018, the duty of care on every show, but Love Island particularly, is extremely comprehensive, and we're very happy to leave you the file of duty of care so that the committee can see the lengths we go through to protect both participants on the show but also our staff on the show.
Yeah. I mean, I'm grateful for that, but I would not be doing my job properly if I were not questioning you about your duty of care to either contestants or employees.
I'm happy to answer it.
And finally, the share price has gone down by 60% since you started as the CEO. Dame Carolyn, why do you think that is?
I think that is because we've had COVID, where our share price went down dramatically because we were taking no income, advertising halved, and no productions were taking place for quite a long time. We then recovered from that, and we then invested £200 million into our streaming service, ITVX. The share price went down as a result of that, and it had double whammied because it also was the 5th day of the awful invasion of Ukraine. We are not the only company in the UK, particularly in not just in media. There's no comparable media organisation, but RTL's share price has gone down roughly the same. ProSieben in Europe has gone down roughly the same. The streamers have gone down even more. And so I think the relativity of your point is the most important thing, rather than trying to not see it in the context of the market that we're operating in, with the cost of living, which is also depressing advertising. And so there is an advertising recession, even though there's not an economic recession. And I think the committee knows only too well that ITV gets no funding from anybody other than from advertising and content. And so therefore, if there's an advertising recession, that will also be weighing heavily on our share price.
Yes, but despite that, you were reportedly paid more than £3.5 million last year. That's a 7% increase on your previous package. Are you being rewarded for failure?
I don't think we're failing. That's the first thing I would say. I don't see how you would sit there and say that ITV is a failing company. We've had 2 years of record profit in 2022 and 2021. We made more advertising revenue in a really challenging market when linear audiences are declining. So we're not a failing company. We make a lot of profit. We want to return more money to shareholders, but we have invested in our future by launching ITVX. We have other plans to make ITV an even stronger company going forward. We have had to invest in technology, in data and in digital capability, which we have done. I think most people that you would talk to in the advertising world and also in the business world would actually see ITV as a successful company who is navigating and transitioning to the digital world very effectively.
What's more important to you, commercial revenue or treating people fairly?
Treating people fairly.
So, despite your increased pay, your staff received an average 3% increase in the face of inflation.
Okay, so this is, can I just
check? Do you think
check?
that's fair?
Chair, I really think you have to do the facts, because the 3.4 million includes a long-term incentive plan, which has not been earned yet. So it's part of a package. And so my base salary is actually under £1 million, and I get a short-term bonus and I get a long-term bonus if criteria are met. The other thing I would like to do is just ask you to look at the report and accounts where the remuneration policy is completely outlined. I don't set my salary, the remuneration committee do, and so I would ask you to look at that, and we're very happy to give you our report and accounts.
Do you think you should keep your job?
I do, and I think that most people, I do.
Thank you. That concludes today's questioning. Can I thank all of you for appearing in front of us today. I hope that you all and everybody that's been watching this goes away with the very strong message that today has not been about Phillip Schofield, it's not been about person X, it's been very much about ITV as an employer and as an institution. I would like to hope that some of the answers that you've given today provide some form of reassurance to people working for ITV and those who, through no fault of their own, have left the organisations, and that the issues that they've raised have been taken seriously. But I am slightly concerned that you're waiting for the results of the investigation before taking any action to improve the working environment. There's clearly some work for ITV to do here to rebuild trust with us, but with its staff, more importantly its staff, and with its viewers, that it's a safe and welcoming workplace. We want to be really confident that ITV has the processes and the people in place to meet its duty of care and to deal appropriately with complaints. We want to be confident that ITV is not letting star power and favouritism damage the lives and careers of people working there, and more importantly than that, we want to be confident that where mistakes have been made, ITV will be making changes rather than making jokes about aubergines. We'll be watching very closely to see whether you achieve this.
Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to say anything at the end of this to what you've just said, but I think in every single thing that we've said, we've told you we've taken this seriously, and it has been about Phillip Schofield and person X. We've spent an awful lot of time talking about that, and that is absolutely fine. But I think that we will take every allegation about our culture seriously, but I think it would be very wrong to depict ITV as having an issue on that. I think it would, we have given you a whole load of tangible evidence that we take it very seriously, that we will listen, that we will act, and we will not wait for the KC. We will be doing, as we always do, we'll be looking at everything that we do, and we will be trying to improve it. And thank you very much for listening to us and giving us the opportunity to put some facts straight.